Welcome to the NCFE Podcast, a podcast dedicated to training, education, lifelong learning, and supporting progression into sustainable employment from leading education charity NCFE, featuring guests from across the sector.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael Lehman, Head of Policy here at NCFE, and today's podcast is part of a range of activity as part of National Apprenticeship Week. We've brought together a panel of voices from across education and employment to discuss various ways in which to be successful and some of the imbalances that may still exist between these different routes and pathways into job roles. I'd like to start by introducing our panel of guests, starting with Shahida.
Hi everyone, my name is Shahida Aslam and I'm the Director of Operations at the Helena Kennedy Foundation. At the foundation, which started in 1998, we promote the equality of opportunity by enabling disadvantaged students to help them progress to higher education into fulfilling careers.
Thanks Shahida. We also have Jonathan.
Hi everybody, I'm Jonathan Galley. I'm a HR Director working in the construction sector and also the founder of Your Horizon, which is a graduate career skills and coaching service.
Thanks, Jonathan. And moving on, we have Anna.
Hi everyone, my name's Anna Morrison. I'm the Director and Founder of Amazing Apprenticeships, and we work with schools and colleges, employers, training providers across the country, helping to raise awareness of apprenticeships and ensure that everyone's got access to really good, high quality information about the opportunities available.
Thanks, Anna. And David Allison.
Hi, good morning. My name's David. I founded Get My First Job back in 2014 as a way of promoting opportunities to young people. Our mission is about making sure that every young person makes the best choice they can when they start their career. We focus a lot on apprenticeships because we think that's an area of underrepresentation, but we do that without bias or prejudice, so very excited about graduate roles as well.
Thanks, David. And last but certainly not least, David Gallagher.
Thanks, Michael. David Gallagher, I'm Chief Executive at NCFE. We're an educational charity. We've been around for 172 years. So some really interesting experiences in all things education and training over a very, very long time. Our core purpose is to promote and advance learning with a particular emphasis on creating a fairer and more inclusive society through education. So this is a conversation that we're really pleased to be part of.
Okay, thanks everyone. So to set the scene around why we're all here today, the topic of this podcast is based on a LinkedIn post from our very own David Gallagher and the reactions to it. In it, David pointed out the prevalence of job roles where a degree is an essential part of the application criteria. Now, as a CEO without a degree, David highlighted that this approach can be alienating for many people who may otherwise be qualified through other avenues, for example, relevant experience or technical and vocational routes. It's fair to say that the post ended up going pretty viral, triggering strong opinions on both sides of the discussion. There's clearly a lot of passion in the sector, so we really wanted to unpack the thoughts and opinions from our guests today. I'd like to start with David Allison to give us a bit of background on the recruitment degree culture, which has gathered pace over the last few decades, really, and perhaps some of the stats behind this.
Thanks, Michael. And it's quite an interesting thing when you think back to probably the mid-80s. Graduate jobs were running at a ratio of about 1 to 10. So the culture was very different to the society, I guess, we see these days. And if you then look at the stats as they come out of various different sources, so by 2013, the Institute for Education was talking about a graduate job ratio of 1 to 4, so a significant shift from the 80s. And then obviously by 2017, 2018, it's very different. We've got 14 million graduates in the economy. Statistically, they're more likely to be employed than non-graduates. And also there's quite a sharp earning disparity, not just in the early years, but by the time young people kind of progressed in their careers and got to the age of 40, average earning for grads is around 35 and for non-graduates is 27,000. So there's kind of a bit of a business case from a personal perspective. However, what is also interesting is to see that this graduate job thing is, I think, one of the many false dichotomies we see in the world of education and early careers. Because also by 2018, you've got 1 in 8 young people who don't have a degree working in a job which would be typically associated with graduate work. And on the other side, you've only got 1 in 2 graduates going into a graduate type role. So I think the data tells us it's not black and white, and you really need to dig in and understand the subtleties to get a kind of a fuller, more comprehensive picture.
Jonathan, it would be great to get your thoughts here.
I think, as David said, there's certainly one of the issues coming out is the prevalence of degrees. So when you look at how things have changed over the last 20, 30 years, it's significant. So 5 times as many degrees awarded now than there were in the 1990s. There's an argument to say that there's a supply and demand issue that changes the job market and what people searching for talent are looking for now. And I think there's a lot of people who suffer who are also holding degrees as well, which is why I think a lot of people have quite strong feelings about this. So I couldn't find the data for this year, but back in 2010, 78% of graduate employers filling exclusive graduate vacancies were looking at only graduates with a 2-1 or above. So there's an awful lot of graduates who are coming out of university who wouldn't qualify for graduate roles in a lot of FTSE 100 businesses.
Shahida, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I actually work directly with our students. So we receive about 400 applications per year for a bursary to progress to university. And that's what our main bread and butter is what we do. We give bursaries to college students who want to go to university. And the common theme we're finding with the students who apply to us is that they want to improve their own lives, and they want to make a difference in society, and they want to be an inspiration to their families, and it's the route that they chose, and it's more about valuing themselves. And I think, having that degree, one student said to me that having that degree has allowed her to build a network. She doesn't have confidence, and it's allowed her to build that network so that, she can get guidance and advice and motivation. But I think there's no, it's just quite a grey area. So there's no right and wrong. I totally agree with that, graduates, that you don't necessarily need a degree, but the people who do need it, we should be supporting them.
Anna, in your experience, do you think we're on the verge of a bit of a change here?
I think we definitely are, yes. It might help if I give a bit of context to myself and my experience. So I left school in 1998 after completing sixth form. So in 1998, that was just when university fees were being introduced in the UK. And I was in one of those schools where you absolutely were expected to go to university. Everything was geared towards your UCAS application. In fact, you had a whole Wednesday afternoon dedicated to it. So I was one of those individuals who said, actually, I don't think I want to go. Shock, horror. I was from a family that would be, my mum was a head teacher, my dad was a social worker, my elder sister had gone to university. So it was very much expected that would be the path that I would take. I didn't want to go. And I would sit in that careers library in the day when you used to have university prospectuses, and kind of be going through the books and thinking, there is nothing here apart from maybe the social side of things that's grabbing me. I just want to get out and work. And there was really no information available to me. And one of the saddest things, I think, is when I reflect back on some of the comments that I had that were really quite damaging, being told that I would never get anywhere if I didn't have a degree, that I would really struggle to be taken seriously. I'd never be able to get into management, and all these kind of things that teachers said, possibly as kind of throwaway comments without thinking about them too much, but they definitely stuck with me. Luckily, my personality is such that is all the inspiration and motivation I needed to prove them wrong and to want to go and do things differently. And really, that's what I've built a really successful business on, is about working with individuals and trying to get information down to students, but bringing teachers and parents on that journey as well. About apprenticeships, and I think where we've seen a massive shift is the introduction of degree apprenticeships, and this has opened up a whole new level of conversation in families across the country, I think, because suddenly there is a very credible alternative to full-time university. So like David was saying, I am absolutely all for choice. This is about helping individuals to access the right options for them and being able to make decisions that suit them best. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I've got loads of family and friends who have been to university very successfully and are now in careers that are supported by the degrees that they studied. But I've also met some of the most motivated, creative, hardworking, committed individuals who didn't go to university and don't have a degree necessarily. So I think it is all changing. I think there's some really interesting conversations happening. Obviously, we need more degree apprenticeships, and it would be interesting to kind of unpack that with the panel today as well. But yeah, I think that would be my take on it.
Thanks, Anna. It's really great to hear your personal experience in that, and that feels like a really good place to bring David Gallagher in as well, because again, David, you're a chief executive, and I know that you didn't take a university route as well. It'd be interesting to hear more about your personal experience and pick up on any points that Anna's made there.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Michael. And I hadn't realised this, but I think Anna and I were separated at birth, because I think there's lots of similarities in our story actually, which is interesting because I've not heard that before. So yeah, really, really good to know that, Anna. It's not just me. So look, that LinkedIn post came from, I suppose, quite a personal place really. When I saw a job that was advertised that had a mandatory requirement of a degree, and probably let my emotions get the better of me a little bit when I first saw it, but I was almost bordering offended that it was sort of saying to me that I wasn't good enough to apply for this role because I don't have a degree. And the reason, as I say, is very similar to Anna's really. I just wanted to work once I'd left college. And throughout my career, I could have found the time, I could have made it a priority, but I always felt that there was a different path for me, that I'd gained, knowledge, experience, and the skills that are required to get to that level. And very similar to Anna, every person who told me that I couldn't emboldened me to say, well, I can and I will. So if anything, that sort of spurred me on. But where this comes from for me, my career started out in commercial recruitment. And then I somehow fell into welfare to work, which was working in some of the toughest communities in Europe, actually, at the time. Two of the top 10 most deprived communities in Europe, never mind the UK. And I met some of the most incredible people who hadn't had, the start that I'd had in life, hadn't had, the caring, nurturing, supporting family, hadn't had, the role models, hadn't had, the support to help them to get through education and achieve, and to get into work and to get on to the next level. But more intelligent than me, more capable than me, more committed than me in lots of ways. They just needed, in some ways, people to believe in them and people to give them a chance. And it was, I would say, probably the most humbling experience of my career, because what it taught me is that just because my memory recall is really good, short-term memory recall, just because I thrive under pressure and stress, so I can do really well in an exam, didn't make me any better, didn't make me more worthy, for that opportunity. Didn't make me more intelligent even, I would say, because I can pass a, knowledge-based exam under pressure in 90 minutes. And that is the thing that's really stuck with me throughout my career and throughout my life, that we've got to find fairer, more inclusive ways to assess, for exams, for recruitment. I just think that is just hugely, hugely important. And when there are things that go into recruitment practices that are so sort of binary, as in you either have or you haven't, and you've got to have done this one thing, otherwise you're not worthy. I just don't think it's fair. I don't think it's inclusive. I don't think it's right. And I think it should be challenged. But, and this is the last thing I'll say initially, but I must stress that I have absolute admiration for anybody that has committed to undertaking a degree. And even if they've not got all the way through and completed, and even if, they've got a 2-2 or whatever it might be, although I think that's changing now, it is an admirable thing to do and an incredible thing to do. And I think it should be recognised and celebrated that people have even given it a go, and even more so if they've completed and achieved. So it's not that I'm anti-degrees. I am for the multiplicity of ways that people can build knowledge, skills, competence, capabilities, experiences to give themselves a chance in the labour market and in life more broadly.
Yeah, I do wonder whether it's that times are changing, because I'm from that generation when my dad came over in the 50s, 60s, and their main aim was they wanted to build a better life for themselves. So they all encouraged us, go to school, go to college, go to university. And that was what was drilled into us. No matter what, you've got to get your degree. And it's interesting you mentioned about the grants finishing, because I'm actually a twin, and my sister decided not to go to university, and I got the grant, so I was quite lucky. But then when she went back, she unfortunately missed out. And I'm now in that position that I've got a child, and what will I be encouraging to do? But, I'm glad there are opportunities out there that if he does want to become a lawyer, a doctor, a subject where he wants to, where a degree is necessary, if he wants to be a brain surgeon, then I'll be saying, yeah, go to university. But if he doesn't want to, wants to go to another area, then I'll be encouraging to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking. So, one of the things I suppose dislike in the debates is that binary thought that it's one versus the other and one's better than the other. So, hearing Anna's example of feeling like you have to go to university or you won't succeed, I find it incredibly irritating to hear those kind of anecdotes, because it's completely unfair. And I see one of the key things that's important to succeeding in your career is choosing the right educational pathway. And that doesn't mean that one's better than the other. And my advice certainly to my son when the time comes is to choose the educational pathway that's fit for his purpose. So how best does he learn? What's he interested in? What's his ambition in terms of career? And that should shape the right choice. If you make the wrong choice and go to university because your friends are, or because someone tells you have to for success, and it's not the right pathway for you, it can be a complete disaster. However, I also think that the point of inclusion has created some of the problems at universities. So I think that the barrier to entry for universities now is a lot less. It might be an unpopular opinion, but the challenge to get into university from your academic perspective is lesser now than it was, and therefore you've got more people going. And one of the arguments for that back in the 80s and 90s was social inclusion. We should allow more people to get that level of education. And the reality is I don't think it's right for everybody for the reasons I've just described.
John, that's a really interesting point. I just pick up on it in terms of social inclusion. I think one of the real challenges we see around that agenda is that social inclusion is not fixed simply by opening up institutions to more people. And there's some really interesting research done with Causeway and Fair Education Alliance that says great concepts of undermatching and overmatching. In other words, if I come from a background that is more challenged and I don't have the kind of support that David was talking about earlier on, I'm more likely to go to an institution that has less value. So we all know that there's Oxbridge, there's Russell Group, and there's others. And therefore, if I've got great grades, if I'm a hard worker, I may not even be put forward to those institutions that will give me the best life chances. So although there is still access to university, I think you have to recognise that not all universities are equal, and certainly not all courses are equal. And I think that leads on to the next question, which is actually, what is the purpose of this degree education? And David Gallagher, your point about kind of recruitment got me thinking. I went to join Ford straight from school and then fell into HE. And I do still love a good model to understand what's going on in the world. And when you think about education, what we're actually trying to do is to use it to, well, sometimes to pick up skills. So particularly things like dentistry and medicine. I'm all for having a surgeon who's been to medical school. Thank you very much indeed. That works for me. And in fact, around 90% of people who go to medical school or do dentistry go into those professions. 58% in engineering, 58%. But below that, virtually, and it's a minority that go into the area they've studied. So why do they do it? Well, probably because it becomes a proxy for future performance. In other words, a student who has got 3 A's at A level is more likely to be successful in the workplace than one with 2 C's. But that's when, again, we get into these areas where the skills being taught through education are not really relevant to the current workplace. And if we think about the fact that we are all doing this podcast today, if you go back a long time, say, 18 months, we'd have probably all tried to get together in one studio to do it. These days, working remotely, managing ourselves, managing interactions, working as teams remotely is a completely different skill set. And I'd argue that students going through the university process today are still being taught skills which are probably not going to be relevant, whereas those apprentices who are going through programs today are going to come out far better equipped to be successful in the next 5 to 10 years. And for me, ultimately, that is the real value of apprenticeships. Is there a much better way of learning what's going on in the workplace with relevant skills than sometimes university degrees? So, Jonathan, to your point, it's about making the right choice for the right reason and not thinking that one is better or worse than anything else.
Yeah, David, it's a really interesting point on the doctors and the dentist thing, because this one's really close to home for me. So over the last 5 years, I think it is now, my wife's been a nurse practitioner, and she's now studying to be an advanced nurse practitioner. And it would have been through an apprenticeship standard. However, she only works part-time, so it's not the standard, because it would have taken too long. So she's doing essentially a master's alongside a cohort of people who were doing that through the apprenticeship standard. And when she first started taking on additional responsibilities, and it's in accident and emergency, so it's life or death situations, my initial reaction was that I was quite horrified, because essentially she was working as a doctor. So she has the same responsibilities as a junior doctor. And I was horrified in a couple of ways, but initially it was this perception that actually, if this is a life or death situation, we need a doctor. And she said to me, well, think about it this way, David. So you might have a junior doctor who is on their first placement post-qualifying, or you could have me as an advanced nurse practitioner with 15 years experience who has seen everything you can possibly imagine in A&E. What would you prefer? And suddenly the penny dropped. I said, well, it would be the nurse practitioner. But it was just this preconception that I had that if in that situation, I want to see a doctor. So it was really interesting. And then now that she's retrospectively doing the academic qualifications to prove that she's at that level already. And the academic piece is really underpinning. So now she's really understanding some very, very technical things that sit underneath the life experience, the work experience that she's got. But I do think it's incredible, isn't it, that we've got these ingrained perceptions, and I had it myself, so I can't criticise at all. I thought, I want to see a doctor. Now I'm thinking, I don't want to see a junior doctor. I want to see an advanced nurse practitioner with 15 years experience. So it's a really stark example of where, these perceptions, these prejudices, these preconceived ideas come from. And even when we think we've not got them, we've all got that unconscious bias, which I think is really interesting.
Thanks, David. Jonathan, did you want to come back in on that point?
I think one of the things I found interesting when I was at Tata Steel and I joined on their graduate scheme was that they had preconceived ideas in terms of what your competence should be, but they didn't have any favoritism towards apprenticeships or graduates. So they could see that they needed really strong apprenticeships coming through, and they had a really strong apprenticeship scheme. And some of those apprenticeships went on to become very senior in the organisation, and they also had a really strong graduate scheme. One of the things that they were quite clear on, though, I found, is the expectation of the two. So when I joined as a graduate, they were very clear that they expected me to have really strong analytical skills, research skills, all the things that you would expect from that strong academic background, and they threw you in at the deep end. And they would treat the apprenticeships going through that slightly different route in a slightly different way from the perspective of what they're responsible for on the job. But there was no preconceived idea in terms of capability and long-term career prospects. And I thought that was really positive from my perspective.
Can I ask a question about that, Jonathan? I think that's really interesting to have those two groups kind of really in parallel. How did the groups themselves, how did you work with the apprentices? So did you find yourself sharing knowledge and expertise? Did it turn into a kind of peer knowledge type transfer opportunity?
Not explicitly like that, no. I mean, I did end up working with an apprentice in the HR team, and she did really well and progressed very rapidly. There was a bit of slightly different expectations, I would say, and you did get the graduates who thought after 18 months they should be on high salaries in middle management roles. But you also got the graduates who did get that and did achieve that. And again, going back to David's point, the difference between the capability of graduates and the difference between the academic underpinnings depend on what course you've done and what university you've been to, and the difference was significant. I think one of the other interesting things is I didn't get onto the graduate scheme until I had 2 years experience outside of university. So again, the the level of expectation from the employer isn't just you need a degree, also you need experience. And that's something I think a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of.
I think in some ways it's kind of the labels that are applied don't really help. But I take, David, your point about the nurse practitioners and doctors are really, really well made. And particularly when you think actually about the full medical training for a doctor. So my mum as a doctor went through that process. It's actually an apprenticeship. It's that combination of practical experience and also the educational underpinnings. And again, go back to my simple point of, and I don't want a doctor operating on me who is not a doctor, but that term includes the practice. I don't want somebody who's just read the book turning up with a scalpel on their hand. If they haven't been there, done it and practiced it, then they can go work with somebody else. And that's where again it comes back to the way in which we oversimplify the things that are on offer and the steps that can be made. I left school, went to work for Ford. I got my first degree with them. I then discovered that actually education was great because it helped me understand the world more than anything else, and it gave me confidence. That's what I took from it. And I actually ended up teaching at universities. And I actually used to really, I don't know how to say this politically correct way, but I used to dislike teaching undergraduates. Teaching a bunch of 18-year-olds about business was just so difficult because they had no experience. However, teaching the MBA guys was brilliant because they had been there, they'd done it, they understood the questions. And so I always used to think that they got 10 times more from the education process than undergraduate. And I used to get a lot more listening and working with them than I did looking at a group of 150 marketing undergrads, because that was pretty difficult at times.
Thanks, David. That brings us perhaps on to careers advice within education. What could be different or changed in this area? David?
So in terms of careers advice, information advice and guidance, it's an incredibly difficult area to get right, is my view, for a number of reasons. One, the labour market shifts so quickly, so dynamically, it's really difficult to understand what's coming down the track. If you're talking to a 16-year-old that might enter the labour market fully at, say, 21, for argument's sake, who can really say it? Automation, AI, just changes in trends, a pandemic, for example. Somebody thinking of going into hospitality 2-3 years ago, well, that's really tough right now and might turn out to have been a bad decision. So I think it's incredibly difficult to get it right. And again, hats off to careers practitioners who work really hard to do that future forecasting piece. And on the basis that I think it's really difficult, I think there's two bits of advice that I would always give. Try and find something that you enjoy doing. As a young person, as an adult, engaging in learning, if you enjoy it, you are far more likely to fully engage, fully participate and get more out. So find things that you love, ideally, or at least that you don't hate. That tends to be, my advice to my nephews and nieces at 16, at 18, whenever. Try and find something that you enjoy, because you might find it's the thing that you do most well in, even if it isn't that then the straightest path to where you might want to get to. And the second thing, and Michael, you've heard me talk about this lots of times already, I think within education, we need to centre it differently. And I think the things that should take centre stage are what we describe as meta skills. So problem solving, teamwork, creativity, critical thinking, judgment, decision making. And I tend to describe them as the sort of the teacher person to fish skills. If you've got those skills, if you've got those characteristics, you're likely to do well, whatever the changing context. Now, of course, technical skills are important. Of course, academic knowledge and ability can be really important. But actually, if you've got those meta skills, as the world changes, you've got what it takes to adapt, to survive, to find new opportunities, to solve problems in your life, problems in your career. So I think they're the two things for me. Find a way to develop your meta skills, try and find something that you love, or at least, as I said, don't hate, and don't be overly fixed on career. Most of us are going to have 15, 20 different occupations over a career. So why be so fixated on that first one? So that's what I'd say around careers advice.
And I think, David, one of the things that I always enjoy talking to particularly sixth formers about is recognising that, unfortunately, in this country, education is a marketplace. In other words, I think, personal opinion, we've overly monetised it. And therefore, the amount of money being paid to different parts of the system, unfortunately, influences the outcome. So truly independent careers advice that is delivered exceptionally well, I think is unfortunately far too hard to find. I'd be interested to know what Anna thinks on that one. But when you just look at the raw numbers, if you are at school, the average funding is £6,000. If you go to a sixth form college, it's about £4,500. When you go to university, it's over £9,500 per year. If you are going on an apprenticeship, it's around, £4,500 if you're 16 to 18 and only £1,200 if you're 19 plus. How we can expect that to deliver equal outcomes is really beyond me, because the money that goes into the marketing of these different institutions, because they can be more profitable, skews the system hugely. 17 billion goes into HE, 1.7 billion into apprenticeship. How that can deliver fair outcomes in a fair system is kind of beyond me.
Shahida, can I come to you next, please?
Just to bring it back to down to the individual, I and David Gallagher completely agree about amazing careers advice out there and careers advisors as well. But I think increasingly this wasn't there in my time. The importance of a mentor. So at school or college, if you can find somebody, because ultimately, if nowadays we've got a wonderful student who's now an MP in Pakistan because she got a bursary from us. She reminds me of Baroness Kennedy, but she looked up to her as a mentor, and so important nowadays. And I really encourage everyone to get a mentor if they can.
Anna.
I was just going to come in on David's point around the careers, education, information, advice and guidance. And I've been really fortunate for the past 6 years or more to be working really closely with careers advisors, careers professionals in schools, particularly across the country. And the introduction of the careers leader role within schools and the statutory requirement on schools to have a named careers leader in their establishment is one that we have really welcomed. I think it's really important. However, the rollout of that in practice is really inconsistent. And I think this is where we're seeing a problem. So I will speak to careers leaders who are trying to deliver and plan a careers curriculum for their entire school on 2 hours per fortnight. And then I will speak to other individuals who are in a school who are full-time, are fully resourced, are given a budget to invest in careers information, advice and guidance for their students. So it's not equal. And I think this is where we're going to have a problem, because obviously those young people and their families who have got greater access to that high quality information and that regularity of conversation around options and choices and access to all of that are going to be more advantaged than those in the schools who are not getting access to that. And it's not easy for parents and carers to be able to find information out in their community to support their children with that. So we've all talked about our children today, and we are going to be advantaged because hopefully we will know where to go and find that information and to be able to support other people and support our children. But I think this is going to be a problem, and I would love to see careers invested in our education system more widely, and it needs to start earlier. I think there's loads of good evidence for showing that the conversation about careers needs to start, and we actually do it pretty well in primary school, I understand, but it perhaps drops off around key stage 3. I also think we've got to think about how teachers think and how the structure of the curriculum is, because it can't all rest on the shoulders of one careers leader in that educational establishment. We've got a real responsibility to empower, excite, enthuse subject leaders and subject teachers as well, to be able to see the relevance of what they're teaching and how it connects to industry, so that they can really start to excite the students that they're working with in opening their eyes about the different career opportunities. And of course, that has changed a huge amount. They can't do that based on the careers advice that they might have got in the 80s, 90s or noughties, because it will have changed. And I think we've got a real challenge there in connecting businesses to education, to be able to keep that regularity and that dialogue. And I think, Shahida, your point about mentors is really important. Being a mentor to a young person is an incredibly valuable thing that you can do as an individual, and many big businesses have got resources to be able to support that, but perhaps SMEs don't have quite the same availability or capacities.
Thank you. We haven't got long left, so I'm just going to come to each of you and ask for one final thought, reflection, perhaps recommendation for something that either government or organisations within themselves can do to improve the picture for learners, whatever that might look like. David Gallagher, I'll put you on the spot first and come to you.
Okay, thanks for that, Michael. I think very quickly there. So I think this is a point that Jonathan certainly made, but I think others have touched on. Let's stop pitting academic versus vocational or higher education versus further education. And it's quite an emotive analogy to use, but my two boys could not be more different. Chalk and cheese, they're different in every way possibly imaginable. Do I love one more or less than the other? Absolutely not. I love them both the same, but in a very, very different way, because they are different things. They are different people. And what is beautifully unique about them is why I love them. Why don't we just think about our education system like that? Why don't we think about further and higher as, and they're not children, it's not a parent-child relationship, but there are two things that we should value and respect for what they bring to society, what they bring to the economy, and equally, vocational versus academic. There is so much academic within vocational, and as David says, these things that we think of as academic, learning that gets you to be a doctor or a lawyer, well, it's vocational as well. So let's stop with the unhelpfully reductive arguments that pit things against each other, and just recognise that actually these are really valuable, important things that we should look to nurture, to develop, and get real good value from as a society.
Thanks, David. Jonathan, can I come to you next for a final reflection, please?
Yeah, so similar to David, really, I'd really like to remove the binary thought and think about what's right for the individual, their aspiration, and ultimately employers need to think in the same ilk, what's right for them, and don't just stick a degree on the job advert. My advice to young people is that, plus get experience. The amount of graduates I speak to who've got no experience and don't really know what they want to do, or they don't know what to do for the right reasons. Push yourself, apply yourself in a really high effort way, and you will find opportunity. And if you come across a great mentor, keep hold of them.
Shahida, can I come to you next, please?
Thanks. I think it is down to, again, the individual, and we need to support whatever choice they make. If you want to go to university and get that degree, then do that, because it's all about that individual, that whatever they want to do, they will go on to make an impact on their family and then make a further impact on society as well. And it's not being helped that they're having to make a decision based on finances. So nowadays, if you want to go to university, the first thing you think of is, oh, have I got the money? And I've got a bit more time now to watch the Netflix and things. And when I watch something around, oh, we better save for Freddie, set up a college fund for Freddie, I'm now thinking, I'm going to have to make a choice. Shall I be saving for a house for my son? Or do I need to start thinking of a degree when that wasn't there back in that day? But yeah, the other thing I would encourage individuals is to get a mentor. And, in our day, we used to call it voluntary experience, but now they call it work experience, whatever you want to call it, but get that on your CV whilst you're at school or college, and then just do your best.
Yeah, I was going to start exactly where Sheila just finished off. I think that getting experience in the workplace as soon as possible is just so important. My daughter's 15, she's had a job for last year, and that is just great, because she will learn those intrinsic skills of getting on with people, dealing with conflict and the rest of it. But I think for me, there is a great opportunity for employers at the moment to really rip up the rule book. All of the assumptions we made about grades really cannot be made at the moment for this year's recruitment, because the individual circumstances of every student, the homes they live in, the access to broadband, the number of other friends, family they've got sharing the internet connection, will all have such a big impact on their outcome in their exams. So if you are an employer and you're thinking about recruiting, don't only get rid of that stupid requirement for a degree, but think very carefully about what you replace it with.
Thanks, David. And Anna, could you have the last word, please?
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with David. I think there's a really important piece here, coming right back to where this debate started, around supporting employers to really review their recruitment practices and to challenge outdated recruitment practices where perhaps having a degree is that blunt instrument that they may use. but to really consider how they might be able to bring some innovation and creativity and look at best practice from other recruiters, other employers, and think, how could we really create a more inclusive workplace that's more diverse, that recognises the strengths that individuals could bring to that role, not just the academic qualifications that they may already hold.
Thanks very much, and I just want to say thank you to everybody. That's been a really enjoyable conversation, and lots of really kind of tangible points to take forward. I hope that we are on the verge of a step change here. It does certainly feel like things are changing out there. So I'd like to thank all of our listeners for tuning into the podcast, and to our fantastic panel of speakers for giving up the time for this conversation today. So thank you to Shahida Aslam from Helena Kennedy Foundation, Jonathan Gawley at Your Horizon, Anna Morrison at Amazing Apprenticeships, David Allison at Get My First Job, and David Gallagher at NCFE. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the NCFE podcast. You can find out more about NCFE, our guests, and supporting information and links relating to this topic at ncfe.org.uk/podcast.